right, Matt, tell us what is really going on with safety.
Oh my. Well, I'm not sure I'm prepared to do that, but so what I do want to talk about is the work that's been done by the IHS, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, and the Highway Loss Data Institute in evaluating current shipping advanced driver assistance systems. And I've got a lot of slides to move through, and I've got a lot to say, but if you don't remember or recall anything that I've had to say today, I want you to remember this. My wife and I have been together for 25 years, and I love her and I adore her, and I can't imagine life without her, and I hate the way she drives. I love my father, and I am terrified every time he gets behind the wheel, and the man should not be on the road. My daughter is learning how to drive, and she probably should never, ever be on the road. I don't like the way either of these three people drive, but the reasons I don't like the way they drive vary for several reasons. But they get to a key thing, and looks like Alex has left the room, but I think Alex made a key point. One of the things that gets lost in all the discussions about autonomous driving is that what humans want matter. The way we think and the way we feel and the way we trust and the way we interact with machines has an impact on the trajectory of these technologies. So, moving right along. As I mentioned, I'm from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety and the Highway Loss Data Institute. It's our mission to reduce the human and economic losses that result from operating vehicles on our nation's highways. Probably if you've heard of us, it's because you've seen the crash tests that we do. My piece of the organization, the Highway Loss Data Institute, pursues that mission almost exclusively through studies of insurance data, and we are wholly funded by auto insurers. So the first thing I want to talk about is some of the first work that we did in looking at advanced driver assistance systems to understand their impact on crash rate. Now, this slide here, and I'm going to move through a lot of stuff and a lot of research, about 10 years of research in about 10 minutes. So my point in this presentation is not to step you through all the nitty-gritty, not to step you through all the methods, but rather to give you the key takeaways. After the fact, after I'm done, if you've got questions about things I've said or the studies that we've done, please see me or email me. This chart here sort of says it all. Everybody throws around, every time you come to one of these meetings, at least 4 times, someone says something about that 92% number. 90x% of crashes are caused by human error. But the thing we need to think about when we think about the impact of driver assistance systems is illustrated on this graph. This graph illustrates how multi-vehicle crashes that result in insurance claims happen. So down here on the x-axis, we've got the striking vehicle. Over here on the y-axis, we've got the struck vehicle. And the key takeaway here is the vast majority of insurance claims are caused because one person runs in the back of another. And we already have technologies that address that problem. So when you're thinking about the potential for all of these advanced systems to reduce crashes, you need to think about the fact that we've got systems deployed that already act on the core of crashes. Now, in Hildy, we've been studying driver assistance systems for over 10 years, and what you see illustrated here is a summary of those results. We've got the technologies here on the bottom. The 0 line would indicate no change, so anything that goes below 0 means that these technologies are associated with reductions in the likelihood of vehicles that are fitted with them having an insurance claim. Anything above the line means they're associated with an increase in the likelihood of having an insurance claim. Key takeaway here is forward collision warning systems with auto brake are the systems where we are seeing the most benefit. We're also seeing currently, this is recent, some big benefits in rear auto braking. In the insurance data for parking cameras, we are seeing a decrease in the likelihood of filing a claim for doing damage to another vehicle. And we are seeing increases in the likelihood of filing claims for damage to your own vehicle. In the insurance data says parking cameras reduce the likelihood you'll do damage to another car and increase the likelihood that you'll do damage to your own. Maybe we'll say a little bit about that in a little bit. Some of these other technologies are also associated with some benefits. Lane departure warning systems in the insurance data, we have no signal at all that tells us that they're making a difference in insurance claims, which is a different population of crashes than police-reported crashes. An important thing to keep in mind over here is we have a lot of data in the insurance database. We have the insurance records of 85% of the vehicles insured to be operated under private passenger automobile coverage in the US. It is a big database. The data accumulates quickly, but the limitation that we have is that we don't know the conditions of the claim or the crash. We don't know time of day, we don't know kind of road, we don't know any of the circumstances of the crash. Now, the benefit to the insurance data, though, is ultimately the big takeaway that people want from an economic impact perspective is what effect is this technology going to have on my insurance rates? So that is a strength of the data. When we look at police-reported crashes, when we can focus in on those crashes that the technology is aimed at preventing, we see similar results, but for the first time, we do get some signal that these lane departure warning systems are working, and we do see some positive news about parking cameras, backing cameras. Keeping in mind, though, that at least in terms of these parking systems, backing crashes that are police-reported are far different than the types of backing crashes that you and I get into quite frequently, where you bump into a pole or you bump into another car. When you have to call the police in for a backing crash, something serious has gone awry, and it's likely someone's been injured. Now, based on the strength of the signal that we got from the front crash prevention systems, we began to do testing on a test track in order to determine if there were quantifiable differences in system performance from one car to another, from one manufacturer to another. And we developed this rating scale, and simply put, a car that rates superior aces both of the tests that we do. A car that rates basic gives some warning because, as you saw illustrated on the earlier result, giving a driver a warning in the event of a front crash imminent situation is a good thing. So we rate those basic. Systems that we rate advanced give a warning but also achieve some amount of auto braking. We're currently testing at 12 and 25 miles per hour. May seem like low speed to you, but at least in terms of insurance claims, this is where all the crashes happen. Lots and lots of insurance claims are low dollar. They're on the left side of the dollar distribution, a few $1,000s. But it's interesting to watch what occurs here. So this crash goes off at 25 miles per hour. This one goes off at 12 miles per hour. And it's a great illustration of high school physics. Force equals mass times acceleration. The acceleration goes up by the speed. So if you double the speed, you more than double the damage. So being able to cut the speed from 25 to 12 significantly reduces the amount of damage that results from that crash, and also significantly reduces the likelihood of injury. Now, if you can pull off another 12 mile per hour reduction, drop the speed to 0, have no contact, you eliminate the possibility that someone in the struck vehicle is going to file an insurance claim and or be injured. Now, there's a tendency when we talk about these systems to kind of bucket them all and say, front crash prevention systems. And I recognize why we have that need to categorize and generalize. But this series of videos is an illustration of decisions that manufacturers have made. It's also, to some extent, an illustration of the strengths and weaknesses of some sensing technologies. So here, this Volvo S60 uses a LiDAR-based sensor system. It's great in low speeds. It doesn't have enough range in order to pick up the crash target far enough out in order to be able to achieve full stop here at 25 miles per hour. The Durango uses a radar-based sensor. It can see that target, but Dodge has decided to kind of punt a little bit. They're not taking full advantage, at least in this implementation, of the full sensing and braking capabilities built into the vehicle. Subaru uses a system they call EyeSight. It uses stereoscopic cameras. it can sense the target, and Subaru has decided to program the system so that it can achieve full stop in both modes. So this first set of tests is going off at 12 miles per hour, and 2 of the 3 vehicles can achieve full stop. And here you see only the Outback achieves full stop at the 25 mile per hour condition. Dodge is able to pull off a significant speed reduction there, and they probably could have gone further. Here with the Volvo, this is primarily a limitation of their implementation. That laser just doesn't have enough range on that vehicle in order to see the target. The great news, though, is that in a short amount of time, we've been able to encourage enough manufacturers to move from where 6 years ago we had just 10 vehicles being able to ace the test, that is to say achieve full stop at 12 and 25 miles per hour, to a point where we have 114 vehicles that are now able to achieve full stop in both tests. And I'm happy and proud to say that in conjunction with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, raise your hand, Nat, we entered into a voluntary agreement with the majority of auto manufacturers in the US, and coming soon to a dealership near you, all vehicles will be fitted with systems that will be able to ace this test. So I think it's a huge win for highway safety. We think messaging is an incredibly important part of that human element that Alex talked about earlier, and that I mentioned at the start of my presentation. People's expectations about what these systems are supposed to do going to have a huge impact on how they react when the systems do take over. And I think this is a fantastic example of how manufacturers should be talking to consumers about current shipping product.
I got you. Oh, you can follow me. 2, 3, I'll be oh, and I need it. I can count on you now. 4, 3, 2.
Remember when only Dad could save the day? Sorry. Auto emergency braking on the all-new Genesis from Hyundai.
Automatic emergency braking there when your dad isn't. It's a great way to communicate to consumers about the intent of this technology. Now, one of the key pieces to whether or not society or insurers or anyone else realizes any benefits from the insurers is that people need to like them enough in order to leave them turned on. And we took basically the kids of all the Institute employees that we didn't like, and we stationed them in car dealerships for a couple of summers. And what they had to do was hang out and wait until vehicles came in for service that were fitted with these technologies, and a specific list of models where the technology retained their last state. So if the driver turned the system off, the next time the car was turned on, the system didn't turn itself back on. Some vehicles do that, some vehicles don't. And what we learned was that when we look at front crash prevention systems, and just a reminder, those were the systems where the earliest we were seeing some of the biggest benefits. Front crash prevention systems, they're left turned on 93% of the time, and we've got very little range, very little different between manufacturers. So Chevrolet is the lowest at left on 87% of the time. Honda is the highest at 98% of the time. Now I have to mention at this point that the complexity of disengaging these systems also varies by manufacturer, and we weren't able to control for that in this study. But the key takeaway is, across all these manufacturers, they were left on 93% of the time. Now, a similar host of manufacturers, when we talk about lane maintenance systems, which I'll remind you in the insurance data, we see no benefit. When we look at police reported crashes, we see some benefits. Those systems are only left on 51% of the time. For Ford and Lincoln, they are turned off or only on 21% of the time. By contrast, Mazda vehicles, they're on 77% of the time. Now, before I say the rest of my comments, I need to make certain that I point out, we have the fewest observations for Mazda. We've only got 26 observations. But in addition to Mazda being the max value here, the Mazda is also very unique in that the Mazda engineers took a very unique approach to the human mechanical interface. You know, when I first started driving, I had a front crash prevention system in that my mom, if I was about to rear end somebody, she'd go, and every time she did that, I'd grab the steering wheel at 10 and 2 and stand on the brake. But every once in a while, we'd be rolling down the road, and my mother would yell, "Look out." Like, what? Where do I look? What am I supposed to do? And one of my concerns is that to some extent, these lane departure warning systems are the equivalent of having a passenger yelling, "Look out." What do you do? How do you react? There is no pre-programmed response that you take to the warning of "look out." But what's unique about the Mazda system is they said, well, how do we communicate to the driver that they need to nudge the vehicle ever so slightly, either to the right or the left? They said, well, there's demonstrated benefits for rumble strips. People know how to react when they make contact with a rumble strip. So the engineers very ingeniously took advantage of the stereo system. You got a left side and a right side. So when the vehicle transgresses the lane on the right side, they pump a sound and a vibration through the right side of the stereo system that sounds and feels like a rumble strip. And we see that, we see that this system is left on more often than others, and B, in the insurance data, if we were looking at the results by manufacturer, Mazda is the only manufacturer where we see some benefits for this lane departure warning system. Now the interesting thing is, the more these types of lane maintenance systems do, the higher the level of acceptance. So for lane departure warning, we've got the lowest level of acceptance. Prevention systems, we see slightly more acceptance, but active lane keeping, sorry, excuse me, those systems that actively steer to try to keep you in the center of the lane, we see fairly high levels of acceptance for those systems. Furthering the notion that how you talk to the driver makes a big difference, we were able to look at some GM vehicles. And on those vehicles, they had the same safety systems, but the warning mechanisms were different. There were some vehicles that were fitted with an optional seat. That seat was capable of delivering vibrations that gave warnings to the drivers. And what we found was that the vibrating seat had a much higher level of acceptance than just the beeping. Now, at 56%, it's still not much better than the baseline performance on the other vehicle, but between the beep and the vibration, it furthers this notion that we need to better figure out how to interact with the drivers. Personally, I won't buy a vehicle with any sort of lane maintenance system until I'm able to purchase this technology.
While performance and design can move you, what if innovation could move them? Imagine a world with Lane Valet, a semi-autonomous technology that can connect to left lane vehicles obstructing the flow of traffic and do the driver the courtesy of moving their vehicle forward, making the highway safer for everyone. Experience visionary thinking at full speed. Experience amazing.
April 1st is a great day for presentation content, but I think it's a great illustration of what people want. Now, in terms of understanding how drivers feel about technology, we've had about half of our employees driving around cars fitted with some of these available technologies. To date, we've accumulated over 50,000 miles and about 2 years worth of daily trips. And we've had people in a host of different vehicles, some of them expensive, some of them not so much. And what we see there is consistent with what we've seen in everything else that we've looked at. And that is, when asked if they would keep the technology on all the time, we see a range of results when we look at front crash prevention, ranging from the Toyota Prius at the minimum to the Audi Q7 at the max. By contrast, for lane departure systems, folks like the Audi A4 the most, leaving it on about saying they'd leave it on about 90% of the time. But for the other vehicles, most of our folks didn't like that system so much. And this is the one that I think matters a lot. So here, you look at these prevention systems. These are systems that are not actively driving the vehicle, but they're actively intervening in near crash critical situations. By contrast, these are, to some extent, the first automation systems that are being deployed. They're capable of controlling acceleration and deceleration and the steering function. And what we see here is that the levels of acceptance are lower, much lower than they are for those driver assistance systems that are intervening in crash critical situations. And when we look at people's comments, we see comments somewhat similar to my comments about my wife, my father, and my daughter. And that is, they just don't like the way these systems drive. You look at that first comment, I couldn't trust it to detect a vehicle that had slowed substantially or stopped ahead and brake smoothly in time. That's my wife. You know, she just runs up behind lead vehicles. It drives me insane. Looking at lane centering, I didn't like the constant tugging at the wheel. I'd rather not have it. So some people felt that the active lane centering systems were just constantly fighting with them. And there were times when the systems would misread the lane markings and attempt to drive the car in places that it really shouldn't go. So our folks just didn't necessarily trust or like these systems to do what they were supposed to do all of the time. So we've begun doing some on-road and on-track testing in terms of trying to understand, you know, to quantify the physical differences between in the way these systems work and operate. And one of the first things that we did was to take a look at vehicles that were fitted with adaptive cruise control and also automatic emergency braking systems. And what you can see quantified here is that there's very interesting approaches taken by the manufacturer. So with the Honda Civic, whether or not the ACC system is engaged makes no difference in terms of that vehicle decelerating on approach to a stationary target. That is to say, even with the ACC on, this car is going to run right up into the back of that vehicle before it takes any action. Very late braking, very disconcerting. By contrast, the Tesla behaves the Model S behaves very, very differently when the adaptive cruise control system is engaged. It reacts very early and begins decelerating the vehicle. And here you're going to see an illustration of this. So we've got the Honda Civic on this slide. This is with only the automatic emergency braking system engaged. And then over here, this is with the ACC system active. And this is an incredibly boring video to watch. But what you're going to see is that in both runs, the car is going to act the same way. The car is not going to use any of the knowledge or information it has that it's on approach to a crash imminent situation in order to moderate the vehicle speed. It's just going to wait until it's about to rear end the stopped object in front of it, and then it activates the automatic braking system. By contrast, the Tesla Model S, with the ACC system engaged, as you can see, begins to decelerate, and the car just slows down and drives a heck of a lot more like you and I would. And so the way these cars drive is going to make a big difference in terms of how much we accept them. And we also did similar evaluations. These are on-road evaluations looking at the way that lane centering systems worked. And here we're comparing and contrasting a Chevrolet vehicle versus a Ford. And these telltales on the left and the right are how we measured the distance the vehicle was from the lane markings before the vehicle intervened. And what you can see is that the vehicle does a really good job of staying within the lines. And here we're measuring the distance to the inside lane edge when steering input was sensed, or when we were able to measure it. And you can see that the Malibu is intervening fairly early. As the vehicle just starts to wander off the center line, the vehicle begins to correct. By contrast, we weren't within the bounds of statistical error in terms of being able to evaluate whether or not the Ford Fusion was taking action before the vehicle transgressed the lane lines. And here you're going to see some illustrations. Same conditions. This is the Fusion. And so it's just allowing the car to go outside of the lane lines. Like, what's the point of having the system if that's what you're going to do with it? And so when we look at this data in summary, we can see that with the Malibu, it kept the vehicle within the lane lines, firmly within the lane lines, 80% of the time. By contrast, only about 22% of the time did the Fusion stay within the lane lines. So we have these existing significant differences in things that we can measure that'll have a big impact on whether or not consumers will like and trust and use this technology. Now, the next set of videos I'm going to show you are some illustrations. These are some of the most advanced driver assistance systems available out there. These are not, these videos have not been collected in any sort of systemic fashion. These are just examples of things that we've seen and observed on thousands of miles that these cars do really well, and some things that they don't do so well. And so this is the Tesla Model S. This is the instrument panel. These blue lines indicate, when these lines are blue, it indicates that the Tesla sees and is following the lane lines. And this is a leading vehicle marker. This is a road sign indicator. And what you're going to see, it's really neat. The vehicle is going to be able to detect, and it's going to follow that tractor trailer. A motorcycle is going to go by, and a motorcycle isn't necessarily an easy thing for a car to detect and index and identify. And you're going to see that the Tesla says, hey, there's a motorcycle out there, which is really cool. So watch this. So it sees the tractor trailer, it's locked on, it's following it, the tractor trailer decelerates, the Tesla decelerates, traffic starts to move, the Tesla picks up speed again and starts following it. There's no lane lines through this intersection, so it's a little bit tricky for the autopilot system to navigate. You just saw the motorcycle fly by. So these are all really good things that the Tesla was doing. Now, by contrast, we've observed this situation quite a few times with the Tesla, and that is when it can't find the lane lines, when it doesn't see a lane line, when it isn't actively locked on a lane line, it starts hunting. It starts moving left and right across the road looking for a lane to follow. And the other problem that we've observed is that the sensors are hard mounted to the vehicle and they're facing forward. And as a consequence, when the vehicle's going uphill, the sensors tend to lose sight of the lane lines because the sensors are looking at the sky as opposed to the road. But what you're going to see happen is it's moving left and right, and then at the end of the video, it's going to do a quick left at the guardrail and yell at the driver to start driving. So there it's hunting to the right, trying to find a lane line. Our driver brings it back in line. We're going uphill. It's going to crest the hill. Loses the left lane line, jerks the wheel to the left, and tells the driver to take over. And we're not the only ones to observe this. Car and Driver did an article, and they described the exact same situation. Autopilot can cover scores of highway miles without driver involvement, and that's consistent with our experience. But then they say, yet occasionally it yanks suddenly and alarmingly at the steering wheel when it lost scent of the lane markers, causing the vehicle to swerve out of its lane. And that, too, is also consistent with our experience. This is really boring to watch, but I'll show it anyway. So this is a Mercedes E-Class, not an inexpensive vehicle. And what you're going to see is, this is not a boundary condition. This is straight approach to a relatively straight approach to a signalized intersection with lots of stopped vehicles in front. And the E-Class isn't able to detect the stopped vehicle, and our driver had to intervene in order to bring the vehicle to a stop. And then my absolute favorite video, E-Class rolling down the road. It's got good lane markers. The Super Cruise or the Advanced Adaptive Cruise System is deployed. And it just follows that truck right off the road. Now, these are all cherry-picked examples. These are not rigorously scientifically controlled, but we're accumulating thousands of miles with these vehicles and these systems and building these example cases in an effort to try to understand exactly what's going on with these very early automation systems. And again, just a reminder, the key takeaway is that how these cars drive, they all have unique driving signatures. Some of us are going to like the way some of these vehicles drive, and some of them aren't, and that's going to have a huge impact on their trajectory for the purchase of this technology.
Fantastic. No, because I'm going to make a comment. I went out and bought the Distronic S550 from Mercedes, and they have a design fault in the automated emergency, in the intelligent cruise control. If you're in intelligent cruise control, it does great. It works perfectly. But if you approach a red light where the traffic is stopping, as you showed, and you tap the brake, Mercedes interprets that as, I want the intelligent cruise control to turn off. Instead of interpreting that, I want the acceleration function of the intelligent cruise control to turn off. I don't want to turn off the braking function. Now, stupid cruise control only controlled acceleration. So when you had stupid cruise control, you tapped the brake, and it turned off the acceleration function by turning off the whole thing, because it only did one thing. And then they must have just taken that and said, oh, touching the brake means I want to turn the whole thing off. No, I want to turn off the braking function, or the acceleration function. And I want to keep the braking function on in case I don't hit it hard enough, I think. And for some reason, they don't understand that. Now we'll take a question. I just want, Alex, go ahead.
I just want to congratulate you on a brilliant presentation, because I've experienced exactly what you described in the Mercedes, which system was released in 2016 with the name Drive Pilot. And after that system was released, they had an ad campaign that called it a self-driving car, which they pulled back. It's now almost impossible to find a Drive Pilot put active E-Class anywhere. So what level of consistency or inconsistency have you seen across other luxury cars that have similar ADAS or level 2 systems?
We've found and identified similar problems with all of them. So in terms of, all of them have some similar aspects, but they are most similar in that they all have quantifiable differences in how and when they engage and disengage, and the boundary conditions that they can deal with.
Is there any industry side effort to standardize behavior or engagement or disengagement with these systems?
No, none that I'm aware of. Nat, can you? No, Nat says no as well. Yes, sir.
So I think we just mandated rear cameras for all new production cars in the U.S.
Yep.
last week or something.
Yes.
That's just
Well,
cameras, not anything
so
hitting the
to-
brake.
So,
Yep.
yeah, so of all your fantasy football here, which is going to be the next one, and the next one, and how soon? And is the cycle of adoption going to go from, what is it, 12 years for airbags to this to that? Are we going to see this stuff happening sooner? Because as Alan keeps hammering on our heads, 1 and 2 is where we get all the safety benefits. So what's holding up the adoption rate?
So I don't think there's anything holding up the adoption rate. I think, well, there are a lot of things holding up the adoption rate. I don't think it's regulation. I think manufacturers are racing to fit this technology. In terms of the next technology that gets mandated, I don't know that there will be one. I think the change of technological pace is moving faster than highway safety advocates or insurers or regulators can keep up with.
Jerry,
Has there been any
speak up here.
Has there been any studies comparing how these safety systems perform in an urban environment versus a rural environment? How they perform differently or better or differently?
No. None that I'm aware of. So we have taken a look at differing benefits. So in our studies, we control for differences between urban and rural. And there is some faint suggestion that front crash prevention systems confer a little bit more benefit in an urban area, but those differences aren't statistically significant. Yes, sir.
I was wondering whether you have any measurement made in different weather conditions, because from all the videos you showed, there was never rain.
Yep. So all the testing we've done is blue sky. All of the evaluations that we've done looking at either insurance data or police reported crash data, all those evaluations, that's the full gamut of crashes. But and you raise a good point. The environmental conditions have a big impact on the sensors. If it's raining, if there's snowing, if there's dust and debris, those conditions impact the sensors. And then also For the camera-based systems, light has a big impact.
So do you plan to do any?
At some
Study?
point, yes, at some point we'll begin testing for adverse weather and also for nighttime. And in particular, we feel that the pedestrian testing needs to take place at nighttime.
So why don't you start establishing a general database which gets the data and the testing from all over the world? Because when you start complicating your testing, then it would take a long, long time to actually get all the necessary data in all the different conditions. For example, in Denmark, they already did exactly the same testing as you did for the lane, at least for the lane keeping and lane departure warning system, but with snow and with rain. So if everybody put the results and the data together, it would be a much quicker way to find solutions.
Yep, I agree. And a challenge to that, though, is there are significant differences in the vehicle populations from one market to the next. And there are also differences to the way the vehicles are set up and programmed from one market to the next. But I mean, data sharing would help move the marker forward faster.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.